Welcome to Applied Intelligence, a conversation at the intersection of people, technology, and getting stuff done. And now, here's your host, Imtiaz Ahmed.
I wanted to start today with an audience question. So one of these images is generated by AI. One of these images is generated by humans. The one generated by humans was actually live and has been published. So if you think image number one was generated by AI, can you put your hand up? Okay. If you think image number two was generated by AI, put your hand up. Okay. Interesting. And I'm not going to give you the answer right now. The answer is somewhere in this presentation, so you have to pay attention to get the answer. But this is how we're going to kick things off today. So firstly, who am I and what do I actually do? Gen AI, the hype versus the reality of what it actually is right now, right today. I'll go through a case study of some of the things I've been working at Reckitt. I will go through a demo of a tool that we've built. And then finally, some takeaways in terms of how to think about applying generative AI, specifically to the marketing use case. So firstly, who is Reckitt? Reckitt is a house of brands. We're a global CPG in three specific categories. We have household cleaning. We also do health and personal care. And finally, nutrition. I'm part of the nutrition business, which basically means baby formula. In terms of what do I actually do, I've had a 16-year career at Reckitt spanning everything from sales, trade, shopper marketing, ecommerce and D2C, and more recently, retail and performance media. Within my retail and performance media role, I do three specific things. One is managing the actual buy of retail media. Secondly is actually creating the content. And then thirdly is doing the measurement behind all of the activations that we do. In terms of markets I've worked across, so if you can't tell, the accent is Australian. So I started my career in Australia, then I moved to the UK, the Netherlands, and I've been in the US now for just over 4 years. So beyond corporate, I host a podcast and newsletter called Applied Intelligence. Please subscribe. And I also support an organization called Startup Bus. Startup Bus is basically a hackathon on a bus where you build a startup within 3 days and you pitch and launch it. I did this experience about 10 years ago whilst working at Reckitt, and it really changed the way that I think about how corporations can really make decisions on the fly and build things rapidly rather than just to take 6 months on a project to make one single decision. So I encourage everyone, if you haven't been on a hackathon, please go on a hackathon to really learn how to accelerate decision-making within your company. So generative AI, hype versus reality. So Gartner just recently published an article stating that, or made a prediction that over 30% of the Gen AI projects that are in pilot today will fail by next year. So there's a lot of issues when it comes to all of these new waves of technologies that come. Everyone gets excited by the shiny new thing and the hype, and they all want to throw money at it. And a lot of people are drawing comparisons to the Dan Early quote back in 2013, drawing an analogy that Gen AI is similar to big data in the sense that, it's something like teenage sex where everyone talks about it, nobody knows how to do it, everyone thinks everyone else is doing it, so everyone claims that they're actually doing it too. But my argument today is generative AI is not like teenage sex. It's quite easy to deploy, and yes, everyone is doing it, and if you're not, you're actually being left behind. So the key question is, how do you actually set yourself up for success? And that's what I'm going to show you today in terms of the case study at Reckitt. So firstly, what does an e-commerce content team do? Remember, my team does three things. One of those things is content. So an e-commerce content team manages three things. Firstly, it's e-commerce product page content. So everything that goes on a product detail page. Secondly is creates all of the media creative that gets activated through retail media networks. And finally, they manage this across multiple retailers across the US. So the way to think about this is the team manages thousands of product pages. They manage tens of thousands of digital assets, and they're doing this across multiple retailers across the US. So the volume of work here is huge. And more specifically, if your company is managing hundreds or if not thousands of SKUs, you can imagine the volume of work that this actually creates for a content production team. How does a content team actually do the work that they do within a CPG? So in terms of a 7-step process for how the content team actually produces content, firstly, we go through a briefing process. So we take the context and scope of what the context of the product pages that we actually need to build or the campaign that we need to build out. We do some research in terms of what are the competitors doing within our competitor product pages or competitor launch campaigns. Then we go out and actually produce all of the content that we feel answers those consumer questions or competitor questions that consumers have on, for example, things like product reviews. Fourthly, we test that content with services such as user testing. So sometimes we use qual testing, sometimes we use quant testing, depending on what that is. Then we actually have to go through a review process with our internal legal teams, as well as our regulatory and compliance teams before any of this actually gets published. Fifth, we actually deploy all of this content to all of these retailers that we just talked about. And then finally, we actually measure the impact of the content that we're producing. So as you can see, this is a great volume of work. And what we actually did was measure out where the team was actually spending their time. And what we found is that 75% of the time was actually going towards research, production, and testing, which when you think about AI can really streamline process and help us get through and churn through a lot of the laborious work really quickly. So we thought, how do we actually make the team more efficient by using generative AI? So ultimately, what is that problem we're trying to solve using Gen AI? So we set up a goal of this project, which was increasing the productivity of the content team by using generative AI. And the two ways that we think we can do that is one, improving the efficiency of the team by lowering the cost per asset or producing more assets with exactly the same team. And two is to improve the effectiveness of that content. So not just produce more content for the sake of producing more content, but actually how do we improve that conversion rate of that content so we can produce less and have it work harder for us. So what did we actually do? So the team generates tens of thousands of display assets on a yearly basis. And unfortunately, no one does the right thing of tagging all of our assets properly. So what the first use case of our generative AI system was to tag all of our historical assets with things like marketing claim, brand name, product SKU, color palette, call to action within that image, even things like size and spec of that image. When you're deploying these assets to multiple display networks, each image has a size and spec, but that's not necessarily recorded in the product tag or within that asset tag. So we actually used Gen AI to do this really laborious work of automating the tagging of all of our display assets. Secondly, we connected all of these assets to our DSP, or rather, each one of these assets had a creative ID, and each creative ID is mapped to a campaign ID. Because this creative ID is mapped to a campaign ID, well, we were able to pull things like the number of impressions, the number of clicks, and the number of sales. So what that really means is that by marketing claim, for the first time, I could actually see the volume of clicks, the volume of sales coming through at a marketing campaign level, which previously I would have it at a brand level or at a segment level, but never to the level of this granularity. Even at a color palette level, based on what color palettes actually work for conversion, we started to see that. So the third step was feeding all of this data into a generative AI model to understand what actually works versus what doesn't work. Fourth was mapping out that content production workflow, so what I just took you through previously, and really understanding where generative AI could augment that production process for us. So I have a team of 5 to 6 designers that work for us. We wanted to not replace these people, but understand how we could really help them with their work by taking out the laborious work out of that process. Fifth, just like I said, we didn't want to replace the team, but some of the outputs that we were seeing weren't 100% to spec. So we added a feature where the creatives that we were generating were actually editable on the export. So the team could actually edit layered files, and we'll go through the demo. So this is the demo of the product.
The first step is selecting your brand. So we're going to select toddler, and then you you input your API key. You then select the layouts that you want the outputs to come in. Here are some sample layouts that we've made up. Now, the next part is generating the images that you want. So you input in your image prompt, and you select the number of images that you want it to generate for you. And next is the part where you input in your marketing claim. Now, I'm in a highly regulated space where I can't really mess around with claims. So within this system, you have the choice of it helping you with text suggestions for additional marketing claims, or you can just go with approved claims that you have already got approved by your regulatory and legal team. So after you hit submit, the system is going to go ahead and find some images for you. You then select image, and then you get these sample results, which is pulling from the Getty API. You also have the opportunity to ability to pull from photo shoots that you have the rights to. So the system can actually generate images off the back of that as well. After you click output, what will happen is the system will start to design the images for you, and you will shortly see some sample output. Here you go. So this is a standard portrait output of a DSP creative made with the generative AI tool. It's now generating the same creative in different aspects. And as you can see, it's flipped the image here using the same image, but now flipped. And then it's also giving you a square option as well. So then if you want to export this image out, you also have the ability to do so. And you can also preview the images in the different formats. So for the purpose of this demo, we're going to export this out to TIFF. You also now have the ability to export this as a PSD file. So the file gets downloaded to your machine. You then open that up. Open. And then TIFF. Okay. So now you can see that that image is actually a layered file, which you have the ability to move around certain segments within the page. So it's not that it's just a stock standard flat file that you have no ability to move and customize any of the elements. It's actually a layered file that the team can go in and make slight adjustments to or rearrange the text, etc. It's not a finished file at all. So that's the demo. Thank you.
So how does this model actually work? So from an input point of view, in the demo I showed you, we inputted things like what's the image subject that we want to see within the display creative? What's the theme and the guidelines that we've kind of input in for that brand? So one of the things that we want to keep consistent is the brand guidelines, right? So one part of it is understanding the images that we're going to use. The second part of it is having that consistency. The third part is having that layout guidance, making sure that the brand is put in the right place, the call to action is up in the right place, the marketing claim doesn't actually appear on top of a baby's face, for example, which was useless, etc. And then finally, looking at the messaging content as well. So all of these elements are editable within the system. Then it goes into that creative image selection. So we're using services like Stable Diffusion, DALL-E, and Getty Images, as well as using our historical photo shoots as well. All of that is being stitched together, and then it is applying those creative guardrails that we talked about, and then producing those editable layered files for us to use. So this is some examples of some of the creative that the generative AI system is producing for us right now, which for us, we're quite happy with for the time being. Now, one point I want to make here is it's really about progress over perfection, right? So we started this project in December of 2003, and right at the beginning, it was useless. It looked nice. I was really not impressed. I'm like, guys, I can't use this. What are we doing? But as we've iteratively worked on this product, what we found is that working with a partner like Sigmoid, we've been really able to get the content to where we really want it to be, where it becomes really useful for us. So in terms of results, what does this actually achieve? So firstly, from an efficiency point of view, remember there were two key goals from this project. One was to lower the cost per asset, and the second was to really measure the effectiveness of each asset. From an efficiency point of view, for different types of assets, this has significantly cut down the time the team actually needs to produce these assets. We're seeing on average a 55% saving in terms of man hours per asset type. In terms of creative production. From an effectiveness point of view, unfortunately, these creatives haven't gone live as yet, so I don't have the effectiveness numbers to share with you as yet, but most of you actually got the answer wrong. The image in behind this one was created by a human, and the image in front is actually generative AI. So from an effectiveness point of view, at the worst case, this is going to perform the same as human-produced assets. In the best case, it's going to significantly outperform the human-created content. So key takeaways from my side from this project. Firstly, Gen AI right now is doing amazingly well when it comes to process-oriented work. It can do these repetitive tasks like image tagging 1,000 times faster than humans, and with greater and increasing accuracy as compute power increases. Secondly, mapping out those existing workflows and understanding where you can augment Gen AI capabilities with your existing team is where that immediate value lies. And thirdly, you need the talent and technology partners that can unlearn the way we've always done it and create rapid experiments to figure out the way we should do it using the new technology at hand. Finally, I'd love for you to stay connected with me, so please connect with me on LinkedIn, subscribe to my podcast and YouTube channel, and I'm happy to take questions as well.
Yes. Hey, it's good to see you.
Nice to see you, Abba.
Aside from productivity and you making like easier to free up people to do other things, things like that. Are there any increased ROI, increased effectiveness, increased revenue that you generated from?
Yeah, so there's the generative AI images have not been published yet. So we're producing them right now, but we haven't published them and done that piece of measurement work as yet. But given from the naked eye, most people in this room got it wrong. Most of you work in CPG. Most of you see ad creative all the time. We feel that this is going to outperform from an effectiveness point of view. Efficiency has already been answered. The project is already paying for itself. But from a revenue upside and seeing the uptick, that is TBC, but we're very confident it's going to happen.
And do the images optimize according to channel and whether it's on media, or can you optimize it for like audience who might be looking at it, in what context they might be looking at it in, and things like that?
Yes. So in terms of the workflow that I showed you, that was specifically for display creative on Amazon. You can templatize this and apply it to different social channels as well. And then you can also customize it by feeding the data from that social channel and the performance data from the social channel to further customize the optimal performance of it. So it's not just about, a lot of people have this expectation that you go into a DALL-E and you're going to get finished outputs. I'm saying that's not the process. The process is understand the workflow, understand the data points that you can input into that workflow, and then work with the team to produce something much better than that.
Two questions for you. One, did you roll this out by market first, or was it an immediate rollout? And two, how did you ensure adoption of your team to use this tool?
Sure. So this has only been worked in the US market for the time being. I really love your adoption question because the entire team is involved in the process. So in terms of building out the tool, taking the inputs in terms of how and which elements needed to be worked on as the product was being built out, the end users were part of that process. Rather than me sitting in my ivory tower who doesn't design content on Photoshop every day, rather than me giving that guidance, it was the end user giving the inputs into the process in terms of building the tool out.
Hey, thanks so much for being here. Kieran, so it's actually a tag on to the adoption question. What teams, segments, departments were early adopters, and which ones were sort of laggards, and do you see reasons why?
Yeah, I think you need to, within a company, you need to have a culture of experimentation and testing for this kind of stuff to work. So within my team, one person is dedicated towards experimentation. So a person is, dedicated to testing new stuff, killing stuff that doesn't work, finding new things that do work. And then on a weekly basis, we have a meeting on what are the key experimentations that we're running, both from a content point of view, but also from a new products and services point of view as well. So within my team, this stuff is easy because this is bread and butter of what we do. When we go externally, so let's say legal, compliance, regulatory, etc., where typically people want to be a lot more safe, I think that is more of a journey of education and partnership and being very clear of these are the things that we're using. So for example, Getty has an API that you can use for generative AI purposes, but we had to clear that through legal before we started working on it and made legal very comfortable with the fact that we're using an API and editing somebody else's images, right? So having those partners on board in that build phase, like we've been working on this since December of last year, is quite crucial.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I'm Kristen, I'm a reporter. How do you see companies navigating the future of AI, specifically the negative side of it when it comes to potential bias in algorithms, and what role does education play in bettering AI for the future?
Sure, great question. From a training data point of view, it's quite important to ensure that the training data set that you feed the models is representative of who your customers are. So I'll give you an example. 1/3 of babies in the US or will be born to at least one parent of Hispanic heritage. So within a training data set, what's important for us to ensure that at least 1/3 of that training set is fed through babies of Hispanic heritage so that the outputs that we get kind of mirror that, rather than using Getty stock image library, which might not be representative of who our customer base actually is. So really focusing on the training data set and looking at the outputs and ensuring that that's compliant to your DEI goals is quite important.